We made a lot of progress this year on our new sailing boat Hattrick, getting her ready for our sailing adventures. Unfortunately, just as we were about to launch, we hit a huge roadblock when our engine failed and needed a complete rebuild. Not wanting to miss out completely on sailing this year, I joined a website called Cruise Seekers and set out to find a trip that needed some extra hands. Through this website, I met Jim. He was looking to take his 1995 Oyster 485 named Skyline some 250 miles from Scotland to the Faroe Islands. Also along for the trip was Floortje, who like myself was looking to expand her sailing experience. I have to admit it was a little bit daunting joining up with two complete strangers for a 2-week sailing trip further than I've ever been before, but at the end of the day, that's what sailing's all about. Adventure. My journey began by heading 4 hours north from Hattrick's home in Rossneath to the harbour town of Mallaig on the northwest coast. This is where I was to meet the team and be introduced to Skyline. Jim has put a huge amount of work into renovating Skyline over the last few years, and she is an incredibly comfortable bed, and even my little bunk bedroom was very cosy. Our adventure started the following morning where we dropped the lines before heading 30 to 40 miles to Portree on the Isle of Skye. We had some calm conditions on this first day which allowed us to familiarise ourselves with Skyline, which was perfect before we got into some windier conditions later. We did manage to get the sails out and do a bit of sailing as we headed up towards the Kyles of Ree. These Kyles have some formidable tidal streams and we arrived a little bit early for the best time to go through. So we hovered around the entrance and we were introduced to Jim's infamous ability to spot epic fishing spots, catching mackerel left, right and centre, as well as a giant pollock. After our fishing trip, we headed north, following the west coast of Skye until we passed under the Skye Bridge. I've driven this a couple of times, but this was the first time I ever got to sail under it. Once out from under the Skye Bridge, we came out into more open waters. However, the wind didn't pick up. It did, however, give us an opportunity to pull out the asymmetric, give it a little bit of test and figure out how it all worked. Fortunately, it didn't really go to plan as the wind kept shifting around and dropping off, but it was still good practice. After a day of sailing and motoring, we arrived into Portree where we circled around a bit looking for a visitor mooring. Once found, we picked it up and settled down for the evening, cooking up our fresh mackerel feast on the barbecue and enjoying a lovely night. The weather on the morning of day 2 was absolutely stunning, so we dropped off the lines and headed out. After leaving the shelter of Portree, we picked up some pretty strong winds and this gave us a great opportunity to get used to the boat in some bigger sailing conditions. At times we had winds of over 30 knots and some pretty big swells, which was a massive confidence booster for me. Seeing the capabilities of a boat like Skyline and knowing that I can use this experience when we eventually get out on Hattrick. This was a great day for myself and Floortje. We gained some valuable experience at the helm, even if it was a little bit wet at times.
Perfect action shot.
This gave us some great confidence in handling the boat and the sails, knowing that we would be heading out into more open water later in the trip. We also started to accustom ourselves to living at sea, having a lovely pizza and salad at lunch, and this certainly set the scene for some good food for the whole trip. After a great day of sailing, we headed into the shelter of Tarbert. We dropped the sail and started the engine. On the way in, we passed a boat that had a pretty bad day. After cutting the corner, it ended up running aground. We couldn't see anyone on board, so continued on and tied up in Tarbert. Despite its small size, Tarbert was a bustling place. Our first neighbour was a massive ferry, which was replaced later on by a tall ship, which was run as a cruise ship around the north coast of Scotland. And this wouldn't be the only time we met this ship on our journey. That evening, the boat that had run aground earlier had managed to refloat and arrived relatively unscathed, thanks in part to its steel hull. We then feasted on our pollock caught the previous day before turning in for the night. The next day we were up early sorting out our lines, and we had a chat with the harbour master before heading out for the day. Our destination was Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis. This was going to be our staging area for our trip north to the Faroes. Here we'd be able to reprovision and wait for a good weather window. We had a mix of weather for our trip to Stornoway. Though the winds weren't as exciting as the day before, we were regularly still hitting 7 or 8 knots of hull speed. All in all, it was another great day of practice for us and really helped us to get used to how to sail Skyline and get us ready for our long trip to the Faroes. On this day we were also fortunate enough to receive a visit from some local dolphins. Although I was able to catch them on camera, it was a bit of a blink and you'll miss it situation. Fortunately though, it wouldn't be the last time we'd see the dolphins on this trip. As we headed into Stornoway, it was a hive of activity, with a new deep water terminal in the process of being built, and when we arrived they were also in the process of pulling a wreck off the seabed. We headed into the inner harbour at Stornoway, passing some beautiful architecture and fishing boats before berthing next to the RNLI lifeboat. With the weather for the next few days looking pretty good, we planned to head off to the Faroes the following morning, so we had a lot to do. We headed off to the supermarket to do a big shop so that we could provision Skyline for the trip. We had to check the boat front to back, checking our gas supplies, fuel supplies, hatches and removing anything from the deck that we didn't need. I then spent the evening preparing some meals so we could have some good home cooked food whilst on our trip to the Faroes. In the next episode we will be setting off from Stornoway and making the long journey north. I take the night shift and do my first multi-day passage before reaching and exploring the islands. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, remember to subscribe for the next one and like and all that, as it does help the channel grow. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.